going around, you'll notice that it asks for student ID. So like I announced at the special council meeting, as per the bylaws, I have to send all of your IDs to the Dean of Students for the status check, so it's being collected for that purpose and only that purpose. So I'll begin by reading the Indigenous Solidarity Statement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands. The Ganyangehaga Nation is recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Montreal is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it is home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. So at this point, we are at the approval of the agenda. So if anyone has any amendments, removals, etc., please speak now. Yes, Kemi.
Can you put external community in the agenda?
Yes, I will add that policy. So external and mobilization, 1 seat. Yes, John?
I'd like to pull the finance coordinator's report.
Okay. Report. Sophie?
I'd like to remove code of conduct and formal complaint policy from the open session.
Okay. Yes, Michaela?
To pull my report as well.
Sorry?
I'd like to pull my report as well, the academic policy.
All right. Yes, Chris?
Yeah, did you add what I sent?
Nope, you have to do it now.
All right, cool. So I'd like to add online voting petition as a discussion point.
Okay. All right, is there any more modifications? All right, so if not, I just need a motion to approve the agenda and all items under consent. Yes, Jared?
I move to approve the agenda and all items.
Thank you, and seconded by Patrick. If there's no opposition, is there any opposition to approving the agenda?
Just a point of information.
Yes.
Where, the point that I added, where is it exactly on the agenda?
Informational 7C, and I'll send out the agenda.
All right, cool.
Okay, so if there's no opposition to approving the agenda, I will make this into a PDF. Sorry, it's not beautifully formatted, but I will upload it to the council group so everyone can follow along. At this point, we're at presentations. Okay, so I will just make this into a PDF. And then we will...
Oh, I guess they just arrived.
Oh, perfect.
Right on time.
Sure. Caitlin?
Yes.
Just gonna get the USB working.
Oh, yeah. Good evening.
Good evening.
You can have a seat.
Where would you like us?
Council's kind of around here, so if you could sit in the
Okay.
gallery kind of in front,
Happy to do it.
that would be good. Alright, so the agenda as amended is posted in the Facebook group, so our presenters have arrived. I'll give the floor to Rory.
Give me 2 seconds here, just make sure that it's gonna be up on the TV screen. Yeah. So sorry to those that are standing, or I guess sitting behind me. I'm Rory, I'm a council member, and I've been a council member for about 2 years now. And something that I didn't see last year that I would have liked to have seen is a little bit more interfacing between CSU Council as sort of the body of representatives and the Concordia administration. I think it's important when we're representing students from all of our diverse faculties that we have some sort of direct communication with them, that we're able to see what's going on, especially with the strategic directions, strategic updates. That's part of what we do. That's why we're here, to be representatives, and the executive works very hard to do that on our behalf. but sometimes it's nice to get a direct interface and to have the opportunity to ask questions, to represent the students that have asked questions of us, and to pass that information back to them. So I'd spoken to Alan Shepard at one of the Senate meetings, and he'd actually recommended that we get an update on the strategic directions. And our Provost Graham Carr is here to present the update with a frame on the undergraduate sphere. So thanks, Graham.
Super. Thanks, Rory, and thanks everybody for the invitation. It's good to be here. And I'm joined tonight by Ann Whitelaw, who's the Deputy Provost and also the Vice Provost for Planning and Petitioning, and Senator Gabriel, who is the Vice Provost for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. And I thought what I would do is run through the strategic directions presentation that we gave the Senate, which is what caused Rory to say, hey, would you be willing to come and give the same presentation here. But we're going to augment it at the end by trying to focus on some of the specific initiatives that are maybe most relevant to undergraduate students. So I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes, I hope, and then we're here to answer questions. Does that sound good? Okay. Let me just ask a question first of all. How many people were at Concordia when we went through the whole strategic directions process a couple of years ago? McKenna, Rory. Okay, yeah, a few of you. Okay, so I'm gonna take a moment or two at the beginning to say something about the background to the process, how we got to where we are. So the strategic directions process began about 4 years ago. It involved 6 months of pretty intense consultations around the university. We had a very large strategic directions working group, which included representatives from all sectors of the university, including undergraduate students.
Sorry, how many undergraduate students?
I don't remember how many were actually on the working group. We did a survey of undergraduate students at one point in the student directions process, and we had more than 1,000 respondents to that. At least 3 of the 4 student unions and the faculty councils had consultation processes. There were a number of open consultations at Senate, at the board. There were a number of open sessions which were available to the general community. We also had organized a speaker series. We brought in people from various places in academia across Canada and in the United States to talk about what the trends were in higher education coming forward. So it was a pretty robust process, which, as I said, went on for a number of months. And the outcome of that process, the goal of which was to design a next generation university, was to land on these 9 strategic directions, which I'm sure you're all familiar with and have seen because they're pretty well displayed around the university. And subsequent to that, we began to reflect on what the guiding principles should be as we try to move forward with the 9 strategic directions. And roughly a year ago, we arrived at the following 5 guiding principles, which were discussed and shared at Senate and board as well, which namely that we wanted to position Concordia globally, to think of where Concordia could be as a university, not just in Quebec, but a university in the world. That we wanted not just to partner with other organizations and other universities, but to have meaningful partnerships, which were deep, sustainable. That we wanted, as much as possible in a large university like Concordia, to look for ways where we could integrate activities, but integrate activities that would ideally have a higher value, a higher impact for members of our community. That we believed we were an innovative university. We talk about being an innovative university, so we wanted to be sure to deliver on that innovation. And that we wanted to make sure that in very important guiding principle for everything that we would do would be to augment the student experience. So what could we do in all facets of life on campus and activities on campus that would improve and augment student experiences? In the first year of the strategic directions process, we focused on a fairly limited number of initiatives that we wanted to advance. One was the decision to create a Department of Chemical and Materials Engineering. It's a huge decision for a university to create an entirely new department. Concordia had not done that for many, many years. The last unit, I believe, that was created before Chemical and Materials Engineering was the school for what was then known as Canadian Irish Studies, what's now the School for Irish Studies. And there were a couple of impetus for the decision to create this department. One is that the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science didn't have a Chemical Materials Engineering department. That's a very important missing ingredient. It's a big growth area in terms of particularly research on sustainability and green economy. And also, as I'm sure you are aware, and it was certainly reiterated last week when we had the gift announcement for the Gina Cody School, there's a significant gender disparity in STEM disciplines, and particularly in engineering. And the one area of engineering where there is a much higher participation by female students is chemical and materials engineering. So part of the decision to create this department was driven by, again, our sense of trying to promote equity, diversity, and inclusivity within the university. Also, of course, chemical materials engineering is a field which lends itself to robust research, and as doubling our research is something that we wanted to accomplish.
Sorry, would you like to take your own questions, or do you want me to take a speaker's list for them?
As you wish. What's your normal?
Presenter's choice.
I don't mind. I'll take questions. Sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering. So this is an engineering department, and this summer there were international student tuition hikes. I'm wondering how promoting diversity factors into international student tuition hikes in engineering.
Well, I guess I would answer that by saying the number of international students who are registered at Concordia for this academic year is significantly higher than the number of students who were registered last year. So the biggest growth that we experienced demographically, if you look at Quebec-based students, rest of Canada students, and international students in our full enrollment were international students.
They're also charged a significant amount more than Quebec students or Canadian students. So again, I'd like to ask how raising tuitions promotes diversity in these fields.
Well, I'm not sure that raising tuition by itself promotes diversity. What I would say is that it's true that international students are charged more, not only at Quebec, but indeed at all universities in Quebec and in Canada. Somewhat of an exception to that are students from France and Belgium, who pay the same as students coming from the rest of Canada, but that's still paying more than a Quebec-based student. In terms of diversity and inclusivity, I think the reality that international students are coming in significant numbers from around the world, we have students from more than 150 countries, suggests that there's something about Concordia that they find attractive, about our programs, about the opportunity to do research, and that our fee structure is not an impediment to them coming.
I can see there's a lot of questions. Would you prefer if I take a speaker's list for the end?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious. I actually wanted to come and talk about strategic directions. It seems like we're veering onto another topic, which I'm fine to talk about, but I would like to get through the presentation.
All right, not a problem. I'll take a speaker's list for the end.
All right. So one of the other initiatives that we launched in the first year, which has proven to be very successful, is something called the Public Scholars Program. This was done in partnership with the Montreal Gazette. And it's a program that allows each year a cohort of 10 doctoral students from across the university to get mentorship and have the opportunity to take their expertise and the skills that they have as researchers and artists and present it in a more public venue. So part of what the Public Scholars Program is intended to do is allow our students to get more visibility experientially outside the context of the university, to demonstrate to the community as a whole what the value of scholarship and the nature of the scholarship that they do is, and in that way to connect better with our community, which is again one of the major strategic directions that we had identified. We also invested very heavily in a new program to recruit postdoctoral fellows to Concordia, the Horizon Postdoc Program. This was very closely related to our desire to increase research activity at the university, because there are many, many fields in which postdoctoral students, postdoctoral fellows are absolutely key to driving research output, research input. It was also, though, a way to position Concordia globally, because we advertised these fellowships not only nationally but internationally, and have so far recruited, I think it's 59 fellows under the program, 49 of whom are international. And so the program has, I think, succeeded not only in bringing high quality, very talented young researchers to Concordia, but also in getting a tremendous amount of visibility for the university on the national and global stage. One of the other areas that we prioritized in the first year was the focus that the university wanted to play, or wanted to put on Concordia's role as an urban university in the city of Montreal, by focusing on what the future role of cities will be in, not just in Canada, but globally. And I'm going to come back and talk about this a little bit more, because we've really tried to make cities a priority in terms of our research activity and our community outreach. And increasingly, I think some of our student course-driven activities as well. The Institute for Urban Futures actually sprang up initially in the Faculty of Fine Arts. Its goal is very much to focus around the community aspects of cities, around public art, etc. And a number of summer schools, I'll say more about summer schools, have been hosted, linked to this important theme. Just the last initiative that I'll focus on from the first year was we also made a decision for the first time ever to create a university press that was associated with Concordia, the Concordia University Press. Ironically, at the current moment, a number of very traditional university presses are struggling with their business model. They're print presses. The difference with the Concordia University Press is that it's a fully online publishing outfit. And the goal is to make scholarship available in a digital fashion, to make it available through open access platforms, and again to position Concordia as an important player in the scholarly publishing market, not just for the quality of the work that we publish, but for the digital model that we're using to make that work available. And the first books, the first manuscripts associated with the press are under peer review right now, and we expect to publish in 2019. The second year of the last academic year was year 2 of our the implementation of our strategic directions. And one of the areas that we wanted to prioritize is health research, health training, health teaching on campus. So of course we're a university without a medical school, but that doesn't mean that Concordia is a university that cannot make an important contribution to Quebec and Canadian society's understanding of health-related issues. And in fact, when we did a mapping of what existed on campus, we discovered that we had more than 100 researchers from all 4 faculties who were working in some aspect of health. And so last year, my colleague, the Vice President of Research of Graduate Studies, convened a series of workshops and brainstorming sessions with that research community to try and map out what a distinctive position Concordia could occupy in the health sphere. Health is an area which accounts for more than 50% of all of the public funding for research activity in Canada. It includes funding which provides significant opportunities for students and student training. And we believe that Concordia can bring a very different perspective to the study of health in the Canadian context from some of the universities which are much more closely focused on the medical model. So over the course of the past year, the major focus has been on trying to map out what the differentiating factors would be for Concordia health orientation, and those include things like a focus on preventive health, a focus on health and public policy, a focus on health and technology. I won't name, there are about six key themes, but that just gives you a sample. Picking up from the focus on the Institute for Urban Futures in this first year, we also decided that we wanted to push even harder to position Concordia as a leading university for research and training and teaching around cities. And we began to cluster a number of the diverse activities in the university that focus on urban themes around what we call the idea of Montreal 2050, trying to, again, suggest not only to our community, but to partners and stakeholder groups externally, including the City of Montreal, which is extremely interested by this project, that we really need to put cities at the center of scholarly research and creative activity, given the enormous role not only that they currently play, but that demographically and economically and socially they are forecast to play in the future. And again, the beauty of a topic like Montreal 2050 is it's something that has applications across the university as a whole. There are researchers and students from across all 4 faculties who can and will be able to participate actively in an initiative like this. We also launched last year our digital strategy at the university, trying, and those of you who, a couple of people in the room I know were at the Senate meeting on Friday, so you saw the update from Guylaine Baudry on the digital strategy, on the extensive consultations that have taken place. The goal here is to try to imagine and understand and transform the university so that every activity that takes place within the university and all members of our community have the best possible user experience, digital user experience that they can. From the moment a student expresses an interest in applying to Concordia, to the way in which we stay in touch with our alumni, to the processes that we all deal with in the course of our daily lives here at the university, how can we take advantage of the technology revolution of digitization and turn it as an asset for the university as a whole. And one of the things that is particularly striking in the first 8 months or so of consultations that have taken place is that I believe it's something like 74% of the, I can validate the statistic, but it's more than 70%, close to 80% of students who participated in surveys around the digital strategy identified that the need for digital skills was something that they considered was absolutely essential to their future success. But that less than 30% of those students felt that they were getting the kind of preparation they needed in the existing programs and courses that they were taking. So that's an obvious gap that we need to address. One of the other initiatives that we prioritized in the second year of the strategic corrections, and Anne is really, along with Paula Wood-Adams, the Dean of Graduate Studies, and Roger Cote, our Vice President of Services, really leading this project, is what we're calling Summer at Concordia. And Summer at Concordia has a couple of aspects to it. One is that if you, like many universities, perhaps like most universities in America, we underutilize the campus that we have in the summer. We underutilize the possibilities that we have at Concordia to be a year-round university. And this has a couple of consequences that I think are particularly relevant from a student-centered perspective. One is that we are persuaded that if we were delivering more courses on if we were making more courses available to students over the course of the summer and really creating an academic year that was synchronous with the calendar year, that it would provide more choice, more options for students, give them better possibilities of graduating at an earlier point, or of spreading the distribution of their course load over 12 months rather than over the current two semesters. We do run summer sessions, but they're relatively limited. So what would happen if we could imagine providing effectively a 3-semester year? Would that not create greater opportunities for students, and also just make better sense in terms of our own use of the facilities that we have? But the other part of this is that those of you who spend summer in Montreal know that the city's an incredibly attractive place in the summer, and that there's an opportunity for us to capitalize on that and start to develop a series of targeted field school, short courses, etc., conferences to welcome people from elsewhere in the world, from across Canada, and of course our own students as well. And over the last 2 summers, we've been experimenting with creating a number of field schools, short field schools, some of which are international in orientation, and also investing in outward bound schools that provide some of our students with the opportunity to do field studies abroad, and we want to find ways to do more of that. So it's a philosophical shift in the way in which the university thinks about the school year. It's something that we think is a good fit for Concordia because we're an urban university. It might not be such a good fit if we were located in a more rural area where students live in residence and then tend to leave for the summer. We know that a large percentage of our students are in Montreal. They're in Montreal for the summer, and that some of them, many of them, might welcome the opportunity to have access to classes then. We also wanted to really prioritize what we're calling next generation learning at the university. How can we do things that foster different learning experiences and, of course, different ways of teaching for students? And Sandra's really helping to drive this project. And there are many components to this. Some of it has to do with physical space. So in the hall building, we're currently redesigning a lot of space to create what are called active classrooms, which foster possibility for experimentation. We're also heavily investing in transforming the Student Success Center on the 7th floor of the hall building. But in addition, we're really taking a deep dive and encouraging departments and faculties to take a deep dive into their curricular offerings. Can we think about delivering courses differently and different types of courses? Wicked problems courses, courses that are of a shorter duration. How can we integrate more fully experiential learning opportunities into the experience of all of our students? We know from the consultations that we did around strategic directions at the very outset that one of the things which students repeatedly identified as something they wanted was experiential learning. The chance to combine what they were getting, the knowledge and skills they were getting in the classroom with the opportunities to do stages and co-ops and field schools and work or study outside the university. And so we're really trying to focus on how we can create more of those experiential opportunities for students going forward, and we'll be happy to talk about that. One of the other critical directions that we really began to work on in earnest last year, we're calling Indigenous Directions, in response to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which had a particular section addressed for higher education and some of the gaps and deficiencies in higher education in Canada in terms of how it supports Indigenous students on the one hand, in terms of how it provides access to all students and faculty to knowledge about Indigenous cultures on the other, in terms of the ways in which universities engage with the Indigenous communities of which they're part, and of course on whose land most universities in Canada are, including ours, are built. And so the Indigenous Directions strategic direction is something which is ongoing, deep, cutting across all activities of the university. It's led by an Indigenous Directions leadership group, which has staff, student, faculty, and elder representation. And there are many, we just received the draft report, the first version of the draft report of the leadership group last week. It's something that will be coming forward for a public discussion in the coming months. It's an important area for us. Concordia has for years and years welcomed Indigenous students from many communities in Quebec, but also from elsewhere in Canada and indeed globally. And we need to, and we have engaged in research activities and collaborative activities with different Indigenous communities. But like all universities in the country, there's much more that we should have done, should be doing, and hopefully in the future. And this is an important priority area for us. So this year, the third year of the strategic directions process, what we decided we should do is not launch a whole series of new initiatives, but instead consolidate and advance the initiatives that we had already begun, which we were comfortable with as in terms of their importance. And what we believed is that if we can move forward in these areas, this will really help position Concordia nationally and internationally. We are currently ranked as the top Canadian university that's less than 50 years old. And we're the second ranked North American university less than 50 years old, and in the top 70 of universities around the world that are less than 50 years old. And that's something that we're very proud of, should be very proud of. We continue to want to maintain that position. People not only elsewhere in Canada but around the world are noticing us. That's one of the reasons why students are coming here. That's one of the reasons why when we do faculty recruitment, our recruitment pool is extremely global in nature. Students also play an important role in terms of positioning Concordia globally. And I'm going to just cite the example because it's a very good example of the successes of students from the John Molson School of Business who participate in international case competitions around the world, and whose successes around the world, literally dozens of podium placements last year, bring great value, great reputation to the university. We're also, as I said, have made it a priority at Concordia to partner in a meaningful way with a variety of organizations across different sectors. Yes, we partner with other universities. We have joint programs with other universities. We have mobility agreements that allow students to move between universities in Canada and internationally, and there's a growth in the appetite for those international mobility activities. But we also partner with other institutions in society, some of whom are very close to us in the community, like the Musée de Beaux-Arts, or an organization like Hydro-Québec, some of which are international in their nature, such as UNESCO or the Aga Khan Foundation. We've been partnering for a number of years with the Aga Khan Foundation on a literacy project in Kenya, which last year won the UNESCO prize for literacy, which is a pretty good, ranking for the university, and again something which is a product not of a short duration relationship with the Aga Khan Foundation, with the government of Kenya, and with other stakeholders, but a relationship which we have really built over a number of years. And there are other exciting developments that are happening as well. If you're on the Loyola campus, you will see that there's a major new building which is being constructed at Loyola with funding from the governments of Canada and Quebec, which will be an important applied science hub for the university. We also just recently opened Canada's first genome foundry, biofoundry in synthetic biology, which is one of the cutting-edge technologies of the fourth industrial revolution, and as part of that received a significant amount of funding from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada to create the first training program for students in synthetic biology, which will be open both to graduate students and to undergraduate students. Over the course of the last year and a half, a team of students from Concordia University and McGill University worked together with leadership from faculty at both places and with tremendous support from the governments of Quebec and Canada, as well as Hydro-Québec, to compete in the Solar Decathlon, U.S. Department of Energy-led competition that was hosted this year in China. Over the course of the whole project, something like 80 Concordia students participated. About 40 of them made the trip to participate in building the house on location in China this summer. I was just at a celebration event that was hosted by McGill last evening. The team did incredibly well, winning a number of prizes and awards. Again, brings great visibility for the university, and it was a phenomenal hands-on experiential learning opportunity for students. Other student successes in the last, it seems like almost every summer, the students who are part of Space Concordia end up winning major awards and competitions across Canada and in the United States. A number of the engineering societies have student groups that are very active in participating in international competitions. And again, the success of students externally brings us brings us a lot of pride and a lot of credibility.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of questions
Okay.
gathering up. Sorry, we do have somewhat of a lengthy agenda.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give one last example and then I can
Sure, no problem.
close it at that point. One of the things that I think we're also really proud of is how we've been able to engage alumni in the success of the university and bring many of them back to invest their time and energy in Concordia in a big way. Of course, we had the recent announcement of the Gina Cody gift to the university and the naming of the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science. But one of the other examples of this is we repatriated Patty Sontag from her position as a managing editor of the New York Times, one of our graduates, to launch the Institute for Investigative Journalism at Concordia. She'd actually been in Montreal and working at Concordia on various fellowships for the previous 2 years, and coaching, mentoring undergraduate students, not only at Concordia, but in a number of journalism students across the country who've been doing really significant investigative reporting projects that have won a number of prizes. So again, we're proud to be able, what makes us proud to see the pride that alumni have in the university and the fact that they want to come back and give back to the university. And again, their experience, their networks provide open doors and open possibilities for our students going forward who will be future alumni as well. So I'll stop there, and
Thank you.
we're happy to take questions.
Great. So as customary, we'll do one question, one follow-up, so we can get this rolling. Margot.
Just go ahead on to put me on the speakers list afterwards because I'm gonna have more than one question.
Okay.
So there was a lot of talk in your presentation about talking with students about things and understanding what students want and what students need. It's a little bit hard to believe that, considering that students' representation on BOG and on Senate have both been dramatically reduced, and there has been a lot of condescension from the administration towards students about who is allowed to represent us on BOG and Senate, considering that students represent their own representatives. The idea that we somehow can't choose the best people to articulate what we need to sit on these major governing bodies of our university is, I don't know, it makes it difficult to believe that there's been any meaningful consultation with students when even the highest representatives of the student body are not allowed to sit on these positions.
Okay, so
So the question is, how are you going to fix that?
So I think, if we look at things like curriculum change, for example, which is something that students are involved in. So the process around curriculum change is an organic process that starts within departments and within department councils where students have representation. And things are brought forward to dean's offices and faculty councils for consultation, and brought forward as well to the to Senate for approval. And normally when we're trying to introduce new curriculum, we're trying to introduce curriculum that's in response to something that we believe students have expressed as an area of desire, as an area of need.
Oh, point of information.
Yes.
I feel like you may have misunderstood my question. I'm not talking about curriculum changes. I'm talking about students sitting on the highest boards, governing boards of the university.
Great, thank you. In the future, just please let him finish.
Okay, so, well, Michaela, you're able to speak to this as well, so Sophie, so I sent it on Friday. The question came forward about student representation on Senate, and it was agreed that we would strike a working group to look at that issue. We had struck a working group 2 years ago in 2016, but in light of the presentation that was made on Friday afternoon, we agreed to take a look at that issue again as it relates to Senate. So I think that there's been a responsiveness in terms of because in terms of governance of the university, the Senate itself needs to make a determination about its membership and eligibility for its membership, and then that needs board approval. So we understand what the process is, and we can't get around that process. But what we are doing is opening the door to taking a look at that issue, which has come up a couple of times in the last few years. So, I don't know, Michaela, if that's you want to add anything?
I think what is really great is that it passed to make it ad hoc, however, the work has not been done yet.
Yeah.
And actually, this isn't the best time, but we need to talk about a timeline, because it wasn't mentioned. That's my goal, to get to composition timeline.
Thank you. Rowan?
Yeah, I think that was kind of figured this one.
Oh,
I meant to take that down.
Okay. Dave?
Yes. All right. So this is a question that's been brought up by a few people that I'm representing the engineering faculty. You kind of mentioned part of your strategy. There's the opening up a new department for.
Just speak up, please. I can't hear you.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So. Yeah. No. So. Like the engineering faculty, right? Some engineers, you're creating a new department of chemical and material engineering. I would also ask, and this has been brought up by a few aerospace students, and they're worried about the accreditation of the program. Do you know anything about the timeline to sort that out, and when that's going to be sorted out about the accreditation of the aerospace program?
Okay, so just to make sure that we're talking, so the entire faculty of engineering and computer science went through an accreditation process last year, and it passed with flying colors.
Okay.
Because the aerospace engineering program was new, it got the maximum accredited period for a new program, which is, I want to say 3 years as opposed to 5 years for a fully established program. So the aerospace engineering program, when it went through the accreditation process last winter, spring, it got the best possible result according to the criteria of the Bureau of Engineering. Yeah.
Okay. So it got passed with flying colors because we haven't received a lot of news about this. We just kind of mentioned that it's going through the process. We didn't get any communication about that.
Okay, so I'm not sure what the communications was within the faculty around the outcome of the whole accreditation process, but I can tell you that every single program within the Faculty of Engineering and Computer Science passed with flying colors. And the only reason that aerospace was treated somewhat differently was because it was a brand new program. And that program has been a runaway success for us. The admissions into the admissions criteria to get into that program are the highest of any of the engineering programs. We have students coming from not just Quebec and Canada, but the United States and Europe to get into that program. It makes sense because, of course, Montreal is one of the great aerospace cities of the world, and we think that's a flagship program for us. We're the only university offering an English language aerospace undergraduate program. So I'm pretty confident about that one.
Thank you.
Rory?
Yeah, so I guess I'm asking on behalf of my constituency, which is JMSB, and I know you were mentioning some of these strategic initiatives. One of them was summer at Concordia, and that the idea is to add more options for students to finish early, to rearrange their credits, things like that. One of the main complaints from JMSB students is that when they've been trying to add courses in the summer, they didn't feel like it was a, as you were trying to state it, like a real semester, Concordia all year round. It's more like it's an afterthought. And all of the classes and all the options for them are all at night. They're all 6 o'clock till 9 o'clock. And some of the realities for these students is that they're not working 9 to 5 and then able to go to class. They're actually working, some typical student jobs where they're working at a restaurant or at a bar, and they're working the night shift. So it sort of makes a scheduling concern for them that during the fall and the winter, they can get classes throughout the daytime, but in the summer, it's almost like it's a streamlined, sort of lower intensity. So it's just when you're talking about having 2 years of summer at Concordia, where is that going? Is it going towards an actual full-time schooling year-round? Or is it still going to be like a kind of part-time afterthought?
Okay, Andy, you want to answer? Or?
Sure. Everything that you're saying is music to my ears, because I've been saying for a really long time that it looks as though our current way that we schedule our courses, not just in the summertime, but I would say year-round, doesn't take into account, I think, the realities of students' experience in the present. So I think that we have a lot of assumptions as administrators and as faculty members about how students take their classes. So I think we still think of full-time students as coming in 9 to 5, fall, winter, and then finding a summer job. I've been teaching for a really long time, and it's been many years since I've known students with summer jobs. My sense is students, as you say, work year-round. They don't necessarily only work at night, they don't only work on weekends, they're working all the time. So I think we really need to take a look at our schedule globally, not just in the summer, but throughout the year, to try and understand how we can schedule classes to remove potential barriers to students who want to take classes when it works for them and with their schedule. So that means we have to understand those schedules better. We have to think about, and I'll move on to another project that I'm working on, which is around timetabling and scheduling, which is to understand how to schedule our classes so that right now, not current practice, but there are many instances where classes will end 10 minutes after another class starts. So that prevents a student from being able, who wants to take both of those classes, they can't. And we have anecdotal, but I think the ability to have robust information, and anyone here who wants to confirm this, we have a sense that many students have to add a term, a year to their studies because they can't get the courses that they want because of these archaic, I'll say, scheduling practices. So Summer Concordia has been an initiative to enliven the campus over the summer. The long-term plan is really to make a 12-month academic year. It's not something that can happen in a heartbeat, but it is certainly, in terms of the directions that we're moving in, is to be able to offer courses for students, just as you described, who are not the, I'm now calling them unicorn students, because I don't think they exist anymore, that classic student. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, so I do want to touch on one thing you did say. My first question is, and then I'll ask the full question is, do you consider, I guess, a partnership with the CSU and Concordia to be a meaningful partnership? You talked about meaningful partnerships, and I didn't see too many mentions. I guess maybe you're talking more about the strategic plan, and I get that, but you didn't really talk about your interactions with student groups.
Yeah, so that's a good question, and we would definitely like to partner meaningfully with the CSU on a number of issues, and we have some initiatives that we've started. Sandra, do you want to talk about a couple on the curriculum front?
Well, we are, one of the things that as we're developing the Next Gen Learning Plan is considering the place for students to offer their contributions to the development of the plan around teaching and learning at Concordia for the future. So there are things that we're beginning to investigate, and remember that when we talk about teaching and learning, we're working within the confines of availability and willingness of faculty in terms of their time, in terms of their energy for adopting innovative practices. So some of the things that we're exploring tentatively through the Center for Teaching and Learning are things like co-design courses, for instance. The new program that's coming online, well, the LOI has been approved. Millis, it's the major in leadership and sustainability, had tremendous input from undergraduate students in the design of the course, responds to the desire of students to have more experiential learning. So that's just one example of a place where students actually had a very strong voice in the kind of program that they wanted to see develop at Concordia. I know in my own, before moving into this position, I was chair of my department. When we undertook a major curriculum revision, we canvassed our students to ask, what are the things you like about the program, what's not? We ran focus groups. we asked them about what, if you had a choice, and what would your dream class look like, and implemented some of those because they were actually great ideas. So those are the kinds of initiatives that are happening, you know, scattered throughout the campus. But one of the things that we're thinking about as we're really investing in the Center for Teaching and Learning in terms of bringing great focus to the kind of work that they've been doing and a more heightened presence in terms of working with groups of faculty rather than individually, is specifically around the role of students. So I don't want to announce anything yet because I'm not ready to just yet, but I see that there will be place there for greater collaboration around you know, the work that the Center for Teaching and Learning does.
I can give another example too. Just I mentioned earlier that we know from the surveys that we had done with students in the whole strategic directions process going back a few years ago, where the leadership of the CSU was on, some leaders of the CSU were on the working group. We know that experiential learning is a big thing for a large cohort of the student population, and really in all faculties. Yesterday I was at a gift announcement in the Faculty of Fine Arts, a donor foundation. It gives money to allow 18 undergraduate fine arts students to have a work study experience. It could be in a gallery, could be with a film company, could be with a community organization. In many cases, it's with organizations that are not-for-profits or that have a very small profit margin and wouldn't otherwise be able to recruit a student and pay a student. So the purpose of this gift is to allow these students to have funding to undertake that. And one of the issues that has arisen around experiential learning is of course the question of internships and paid internships. And this is an area where the CSU, led by Michaela last year, brought the issue to Senate and a working group, subcommittee of Senate called APPC, the Academic Planning and Priorities Committee, which I chair, was mandated to take a look at the issue of paid internships at the university. First meeting last week, struck the working group. We actually, in my office, spent much of the summer mapping the internships, the co-op experiences, et cetera, that exist at the university, trying to identify, first of all, how many we have, and the number is quite robust. Which ones are paid, which ones are not paid, for which ones do students get credit, not credit, so to get that background information. So that's an example of an area where we're partnering. One of the other things that we have just done to try to position the university and create more opportunities for students in terms of experiential learning is that we've partnered with an organization called Ripen. Ripen is kind of like a bulletin board for employment opportunities for students. Could be project opportunities on campus, could be internship opportunities or small work opportunities for students with organizations off campus. There are a few other universities in Canada that are also partnering with Ripen. So we're trying to do more and more in that area. That's not all specifically with the CSU per se, but I think it's responding to what we've heard over and over from students in all faculties about a desire that they have.
I mean,
and I'll say that one of the limitations that we have, for instance, if we look at something like co-op, is the single biggest impediment that we have to growing our co-op program is we don't have sufficient funding to employ the staff to go out and find the co-op opportunities. And partly that's because of the mechanism that we need to use within the funding formula of the university and in conformity with Quebec funding regulations about the money that we can use for that. You know, one area I'd love to discuss with the CSU is would there be an interest in some kind of fee levy that would allow us to partner and create more of those positions, which would allow us to have more co-op opportunities for students. There's a great partnership between the CSU and the library, which has provided significant funding to the library to allow the library to extend its hours to make itself more open. Are there other areas where we can imagine a partnership that would benefit students?
I mean, these are all great initiatives, and I'm happy that this is like the CSU and the Concordia administration are partnering with this, but also my question, when it comes to meaningful relationships, it also talks about dialogue. And my question about this is because since the last academic year, the Concordia administration did try to do applications for its own undergraduates, which according to the Accreditation Act does, appointing two committees goes under the CSU. My question about this is also, if we're going to have a meaningful relationship, can the Concordia administration in the future start respecting the fact that we alone have the right, according to the Accreditation Act, to appoint students to the Board of Governors, to the Senate, and to task force like the Sexual Violence Task Force?
So okay, let's take the last two examples, because I think they're so. Yes, there's a difference of opinion between the CSU.
I mean, it's
and the
in the
university.
law. So.
Sorry, just one question, one follow-up.
Yeah. So there's, but the reason why is because there's been a difference of opinion. But when we look at the task force that was struck last year on sexual misconduct, on the issue of student representation, in the end. The Graduate Student Association was content to use the appointment process that had been proposed. The CSU was not, and in the end, the university said what's important for us is to have student representation on that task force, and the CSU ended up selecting the members who are on the task
Point of
force.
information.
Yes.
And
Sorry, there's just a
point of information. So Article 32 of the Accreditation Act actually explicitly states that that is untrue.
Sorry, it's not a point of information.
Is that
please
like
continue.
it's just not correct? Is that
It's not a point of information. Sorry, anyone can speak, say what they want. I can't judge anyone's responses to questions. I just prefer it if we hurry it up a little bit, since it's already been an hour and we're a little bit over time.
And on the Senate one, as I just previously indicated, again, we agreed that we would strike a task force to look at the question of eligibility to sit on Senate. So I think there's not a harmony and a perfect convergence between the position of the university and the position of the CSU on that. But I think looking at those two examples, which are the two most recent examples, the universities tried to be open and accommodating.
Right, but my question was, will you commit to respecting that fact about the CSU?
Okay, sorry, it's been more than one question, one follow-up. I understand that some people don't appreciate the responses, but we're not here to judge the content. It's one question, one follow-up, and we move on. Sophie?
Well, I feel like I've said my piece on the Accreditation Act already, so I'll save that. I was wondering, when we were talking about next generation learning, so going back to the strategic directions, something that was brought up a lot is like redesigning space. I was wondering if there's any discussion, as I don't currently have speaking privileges on Senate, if there's any discussion about the accessibility of services and how you plan on making medical notations more accessible for students. I understand that there are various processing things, but as it stands, it costs $30 per course for a student to get a medical notation, and they have to go through the office of the registrar, and there's no guarantee they get that notation. So oftentimes, what happens is that a student will have a medical note, but it won't be accepted as valid, or they'll make the request, and for whatever reason, they're put through many loopholes. There's also a kind of gap between when the incomplete deadline and the medical notation deadline is. You have a month between when the deadline to submit all your work for an incomplete notation and when you have to file for a medical notation. So basically what happens sometimes is students will pay for an incomplete notation, which is $25 for credit, and then still have to retroactively go back and fight for their right for a medical notation because they got misinformation. So I was wondering, when we're talking about next generation learning and moving to the future and going beyond, what is part of the strategic direction plans and making sure that students who do have medical requirements and medical needs and medical issues that can prevent and create learning barriers for them, what is being done to make sure that students aren't paying between $120 to $150 a semester for a full-time semester to get medical notations on their transcripts without a guarantee of getting those transcripts, and it's non-refundable.
Okay, so maybe I'll try to answer the question by saying that I think one of the things that we have to admit in the university is that we have a number of processes and procedures that are not next generation. That's a reality. And that's a reality that not only students confront, but that staff members and faculty confront. And I'm not proud of that, but I'm certainly going to admit that it's the case. So I think the issues that you're flagging are important ones, and I guess I would address the general issue of accessibility in two ways, and I'm going to ask Sandra and maybe Ann as well to speak to this, because accessibility is an issue that I think we're trying to take more and more. It's an important issue, and that we want to recognize it more, and that there are multiple forms of accessibility challenges that we need to address for students, for staff, for partners from outside who want to work with us. So maybe, Sandra, you can talk about some of the initiatives that you're involved in.
Well, actually, I can
point.
speak directly to Sophie's question that there's a committee that's called the Process Review Committee. I don't know what committees. This is one of the issues that we're taking up. So it's under review.
Are there student representatives on that committee?
I don't think so. I'm not sure if there are or not. I haven't seen any students participate in it so far. In my experience of committees, sometimes students are actually named on the committee but don't come to the meetings. So in the time since I've been in this position, I haven't seen students on it. However, what has happened is that the review of this process was initiated by a staff member who used to process these in the Faculty of Fine Arts. So her experience came from hearing students talking about the struggles that they were having. There's also some inconsistencies across faculties with some of the rules, addressing that, about the various levels of committees that things need to bounce through. So we've looked through all of that. We've made some recommendations, and so we'll wait to see. Pat Kelly is chairing that committee, and he's quite good at following up to see. In fact, I have to present tomorrow on my implementation plan for process review. So that's part of the thing that we've actually been looking at. Not so much the fee structure, so I can't speak to that, but the process itself. But I mean that the whole committee was struck as it doesn't get represented in the 9 strategic directions, but it was one of the things that was heard across the board in that consultation process was, wow, bureaucracy, wow, processes are very complicated here, and so what can we do to address that? So I'm glad you asked the question, because I may even have more update tomorrow.
Do you want to talk a bit about some of the other accessibility initiatives?
There's a lot of questions following.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't mean to impose constraints. It's just it's been a lot of questions at once. You had a question and follow-up, Princess?
So my question kind of has to do with 2 things. So I'm an international student, and I'm not a counselor, I'm an executive. So I guess I'm sort of representing international students. So on one hand, someone did bring up international student tuition rates, and when you were talking about it, you brought up how French students, French students get the Canadian rate. I was wondering why the admin hasn't sort of taken that initiative and applied that as well to students from Francophone speaking either Caribbean or African nations, because I'm West African. I'm not from a Francophone African country though, but I do think that that would kind of make sense, because part of the reasons why there is a huge number of international students in particular from the the French-speaking part of Africa is because of the accessibility to language here, and I know that that's part of the reason why the government struck up that deal. So that's one thing I'd like to bring up. And then another thing that I also wanted to know about was, so on the Indigenous directions that you were explaining, this also is in regards to tuition, being that this is land that belongs to, we are on land that belongs to Indigenous folks, why is it that there isn't some sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not from Canada, why isn't there some sort of, I don't want to use the word like discount, but yeah, essentially some sort of discount or free tuition for Indigenous students, just because that, I guess, BIPOC folk in general have already a very difficult time accessing education, and the higher level of education is even way harder for them to access, whether you be from that particular nation or you're an international student. And so, you know, I understand that you also brought up how international students, the number of international students has increased. I think that that's great, but at the same time, I also felt like, to be quite frank, it's sort of like saying, well, it's like my interpretation of you saying that although international student tuition has increased and the level of admission from international students has also increased, is sort of like being like, well, they can afford it, so that's why they're still coming here. And you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, that's just what I was assuming. So yeah, so on the front of international tuition and Indigenous students, like, excuse my language, but why is our tuition so high?
Okay, so let me go back to the first point about the French and Belgian differential fees. So those differential fees are actually set by the government of Quebec. So the government of Quebec had one funding formula for students from France a few years ago whereby they were paying the same tuition as students from Quebec. They made a decision to change that, if I recall, about 3 years ago, and align what students from France would pay with what students from the rest of Canada would pay. And this last year, they decided to add students from only the Francophone portion of Belgium. So that's a Quebec government policy. On the question of Indigenous students and fees, that's a really good question. So we know that that a percentage of the Indigenous student population that we have at Concordia, some of them are indeed severely challenged financially. We are trying to do more to address their needs, not just financial needs, but other support needs that they have. We've actually begun discussions about the issue of tuition for Indigenous students. And this is a conversation which is beginning to happen at a number of Canadian universities about whether tuition fees for Indigenous students should be uniform across the country. So even if a student was coming from British Columbia, quote unquote, an out-of-province student, if they were an Indigenous student, should they be paying the same fee that a student would be paying from Quebec? The other way that we would like to address financial challenges that students of all kinds feel, whether they're international or domestic students, is through greater financial support in the form of bursaries and scholarships. And as you probably know, we're in the middle of a capital campaign. And one of the things which is anchored at the middle of that campaign is financial support for students. The Gina Cody gift that was announced last week includes a significant investment in funding to promote accessibility, equity, diversity, and inclusiveness for students wanting to come study engineering and computer science at Concordia. And as I mentioned, the example of the donation yesterday in the Faculty of Fine Arts, again, centered right on student needs. Do we have enough money in the university to provide the level of bursaries and scholarships that we would like to for students, whether they're undergraduate or graduate? The answer is no. And we're competing, we know, with other universities in the province and in the country that have access to more funding in the form of fellowships, bursaries that they can provide their students. But it's absolutely a priority of our fundraising campaign. And on the specific question of Indigenous students, yes, that's an active point of discussion, including with the leadership of the Indigenous Directions Leadership Group.
Thank you. John?
Hey. So I'm John, I'm the finance coordinator for the union. Thanks for coming. I used to be on the executive of the Dalhousie Student Union, actually, before I came to Concordia for student union. We actually have administration come to our student union council. We've often had administration come to our student union council or as union committees quite often. Usually it'd be more like low to mid-level working groups of the Senate or from faculties trying to get feedback on stuff. And if they come with specific set of questions that they're trying to get feedback from students, it'd be quite productive. So this is great. Thank you so much for coming, but I just want to pass it along for future weeks. We would like to have you come and get more feedback. Those working groups coming to council is a really productive use of everybody's time.
Okay.
So I just want to pass it along. That's productive and helpful.
And I want to say thank you for the invitation. So this is the first time I've been invited to the CSU, so I'm happy to take you up.
That's just, my question is about touching on several of the strategic directions that you mentioned. This is augmenting the student experience, delivering innovation, partnering meaningfully, and positioning globally. I'm talking about these as they touch to the International Student Health Plan.
To the International Student
Health Plan.
Okay.
Okay. So it's administered through Blue Cross. It is the single most expensive international student health plan in any university in Canada, at more than $1,100 per student. And when we recently had a meeting, myself and Sophie, with your colleague Dennis Cassette, with the finances of the university budget system, we learned through him that it's purely a student's pay. The money goes out to Blue Cross. So it's not a revenue generator for the university. It's simply just cash goes in, cash goes out. What I'd like to ask is that because the health plan itself is up for renegotiation this year, the 3-year term was up and then extended, and now they're going through the RFP proposal process again, looking at that?
You mean the health agreement with Blue Cross, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So what I'd like to put forward is a suggestion of creating some partnerships with the CSU is looking at the possibility of student union management of that health plan. This is something that's done in a number of university student unions, mostly in English Canada, not so much in Quebec, but it's certainly something that can be done in Quebec. So one of the reasons I bring this up as partnering meaningfully is because the management of a student union health plan is such that students have a much more easy time giving feedback on what they want out of the health plan. So they want more coverage, they want lower rates. Those things are much more easily given as feedback to a student union that's democratic and has requirements around transparency reporting for that health plan. Further to the fact that the way, my understanding of how it's managed here at Concordia, international students have a difficult time giving input because they don't know where to give that feedback to, and the collection of feedback isn't necessarily done. So I want to put forward this idea of creating a partnership with the CSU around student management of the international health plan, because we don't think that if that control would be transferred, it would cost the university anything. It would see money in, money out. We want to look at possibilities of ways to make the health plan more in line with what international students would like out of it. Is this something you'd be interested in exploring with us?
Sure. So I'm personally not very familiar with the health plan, but I'm definitely willing to raise it with Denis Cassette, with whom you met. I don't know the details of the plan, and I don't know when the particular contract with the Blue Cross is coming due. But if I'm sure you're correct, it's coming due this year, then this is the time to have that conversation. So I'd be happy to raise that with him. Did you raise it with him when you met with him?
Not in that particular meeting. It wasn't so much a lobby. It's actually him giving us a workshop on how the Concordia's budget works.
Oh, okay.
So
It's like the budget for the budget conversation. Okay, got it. Okay. Noted.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hold up.
Peter?
Yep, so I'm a fine art student. I'm basically asking on behalf of all fine art students. Right now, the main concern for all fine art students is that there's a big disconnection between fine arts and other faculties. Like, and both academically and like socially and everything else. Is there any way we can kind of change the way that right now fine arts stands?
Yeah, so it's an interesting point because when the what we call the EV building was constructed, it was meant to be an integrator for engineering, computer science, and fine arts, particularly the part of fine arts that was technology-oriented, design, computational arts, some of the materials work, etc. And it never really gestated in the fashion that I think the people who originally had the idea had imagined. But I'm optimistic that that's changing now, and I'm optimistic it's changing for a variety of reasons. Both the Dean of Fine Arts and the Dean of the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science are very interested in looking for ways that they can develop collaborations and collaborative programs between engineering and fine arts. There are already a number of examples in research centers. I think of the Games Research Center, Technoculture Arts and Games, where there are students and faculty involved from both faculties. I think generally the problem goes beyond fine arts and engineering computer science. It's really a question about how we can get students across the university to connect with each other.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just for a follow-up, like we also have two programs that are right now in JMSB building only. So like right now, fine arts programs are kind of like everywhere on campus. We have two that are only in JMSB, a lot in EV building and a lot in the way building. So we don't have a main thing that for us. Do we have any kind of like spreadsheet for like later on? Like, is there any way that we can change this kind of format?
So that's a space problem among other things. So fine arts is distributed among a number of different buildings in the university. I've forgotten the exact number offhand. Do you remember it? But it's true that fine arts is quite distributed, and that's a challenge. It's particularly a challenge at Concordia for two reasons. One, we have the largest fine arts faculty in the country, and I have to say we also have the best fine arts and School of Fine Arts and Design in the country as well. So size is huge, and apart from that, so to give you an example, our fine arts faculty is larger than, say, the Ontario College of Art and Design, which is a standalone university, or Emily Carr University, which is a standalone university. So that's the kind of scale we're talking about. The second challenge that we have is we're operating in a very tight footprint in the university. We don't have really any free space at this point. We're really struggling with space issues. So we're continually looking at how we can renovate space, make better use of space. This actually ties into what Anne was saying about moving towards the 12-month curriculum. Part of better utilization of space is better alignment of space and time. So it is indeed a real challenge for us. In the case of fine arts, we also know that some of the facilities that the faculty is in, particularly the studio arts and creative arts therapy in the VA building down on Boulevard René Lévesque, some of that building was not built for some of the purposes for which it's now being used. It's not ideal. It's not ideal space, but we're short on alternatives at this point. So space is a massive challenge for all universities, but it's particularly a challenge for a university like us, which is right in the heart of the downtown city of Montreal. We don't have much flexibility the way the University of Calgary does, or the way the University of British Columbia does, to use the vast parkland that we have to add on new buildings. So it is a challenge. There's no question about it.
Thank you. So I have Jad and Rowan as first-time speakers, and then if everyone's amenable to it, we should probably cut this short. Oh, first-time speakers. As we have a lengthy agenda, and we've already spent an hour and a half on this point. Jad.
So hi. Guys, my name is Jad. I'm a council member here, and like the rest of us, we all had to get elected to occupy these positions. Which brings me to my question when it comes to representation within the student body and elections. And we all know we live in a very democratic country, and it's something that we have to uphold. Nonetheless, when we look at election participation or attendances during those seasons, they're very, very low. And sometimes they don't even make 5% of the general populations. Almost everyone here got elected with 100-ish votes, went into a student body that represents 44,000 students. So I guess my question is, the CSU is actively trying to find ways to have more students participate in elections and more students vote, because that's the only way we can find out what their concerns are. And my question is, what is the administration doing, or is there any collaboration that the administration would want to work with so that we can increase this participation? Because otherwise, the democracy within Concordia is definitely at stake.
Okay, well, I think the question about what the role of the university administration could be in the student election process, that's really something that the student union has to make a decision about, because the management of the election.
The
management of the elections is up to the student.
This isn't really relevant to the discussion.
My privilege is basically just the CSU does not represent 44,000 students. That's the total enrollment at Concordia. We only represent the undergraduate students, so that number is smaller. There is a good reason why the administration does not get involved in student union elections, and I'll talk to you about it at length.
Great, thank you. All right, Rowan?
Sure. I'd like to actually start by answering a question that Graham asked. First of all, you asked if we would be interested in having a fee levy for work opportunities for students. I'd like to say absolutely not. The university has taken a strategy of taking issues that the university should be working on and instead relegating these issues and the costs that come with these issues onto students. And one of the ways that they do that is through adding fee levies. This is a form of austerity. It's a subtle form, but that's what it is. And it's a form of screwing over students who are struggling to pay rent and to eat. And it's absolutely not something that we're interested in. I'd also like to ask a question. You talked a lot about Indigenous directions, which is great, and I'm all for. I just have a question regarding Indigenous directions, specifically why is it that Concordia still has not divested and instead has simply delegated it to a committee which meets once or twice a year and kind of has been used as a delay tactic more than anything else, in my opinion, as someone who was involved with divestment of Concordia and still is.
So on the divestment question, actually my understanding is that the university was really one of the leaders in trying to provide an alternative strategy around investment. I'm not, to be perfectly honest, 100% familiar with the divestment question, and I'm trying to recall the committee that Graham was chairing on. So yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm just not 100% familiar with what the strategy was that was implemented a couple of years ago. And on the fee levy question, you know, it's simply our challenge. You know, that's why I'm asking. Our challenge is how we can provide more opportunities for students to benefit from experiential learning, and you know, we're trying to find as many ways as we can within our existing operating budget to make that possible. But in terms of co-op specifically, we're limited in terms of what we can and do in that area because of the nature of the funding that we receive from government to support those activities. And if we were to channel more funding from the FIOs to support co-op, we would have to stop doing other activities because we have to operate with a fixed budget.
Did you have a follow-up question, Rob?
Sure, you're talking about like fixed budgets, and you know, obviously the government, especially the new government, is interested in cutting fundings for universities, which is a problem. But why not take things like administrative salaries, where we have a president who's paid more than any other administrator in Quebec, etc. Like, there's a lot of ways that the university could take frivolous expenses down.
So I think the answer to that is that we're a pretty lean university at Concordia, and we always have been. If you look at the pattern over the last 10 years, where we've experienced significant numbers of cuts, and this has been in a presentation that Denis Cassette, the Chief Financial Officer, has given publicly. Our investment in the academic life of the university has gone up, including in student bursaries and scholarships, and the total percentage of the university operating budget that goes to administrative activities has declined. So I think we, having lived through the budget cuts year over year, I know very well that the university administration took the decision at the time that we would weather those cuts, but not by cutting back on the academic mission of the university, and we didn't. We continued to invest in recruiting faculty. We invested more money in providing scholarship and bursary funding for students, and we made the cuts. Elsewhere, and it was really painful. The reality prior to the election was that the government that had been in place previously, the Liberal government, had told the university community that there was a 5-year reinvestment plan that was starting. 2 years of that reinvestment had begun. The reality is that when that reinvestment was scheduled to have been completed under the previous government by, I think, 22, 23, we were going to be back essentially in the budget position we were in 2010. So it's been a very difficult, challenging time for all of the universities in the réseau. We are still operating a deficit. We've reduced that deficit as we're obligated to do. And we hope to eliminate that deficit in the coming year. But I think in terms of financial management of the university, Concordia has done extremely well. We've been very prudent, and we've kept our focus on the academic mission. And I think that's reflected in part by the fact that, or the benefits of that are reflected in part by the fact that students are knocking down the doors to come here. They're coming here because they want to be part of the university. They're coming here because they like our programs. They're coming here because, in many cases, though not all, we have great facilities and there are great opportunities for them. I think that's a pretty good measure of administrative decision making.
Thank you. There's 2 more first-time speakers, Caleb and then Sophie.
All right, thank you for coming. My question pertains to something I noticed a year ago. Basically, I'm a poli-sci and economics student. The issue doesn't pertain as much in the economics department, but more in the poli-sci department. I realized that out of all the professors I've had, they've all been predominantly white men. And my question is, I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if it's the administration that has more of a say into this, but my question is there anything done to promote more diversity, especially in hiring practices and programs that have more of a, let's just say predominantly white, hetero focus?
You're asking me that question? Yeah, so that's a great question, and the timing is perfect because actually this week we're just beginning the hiring cycle for next year. And one of the things that we are making a priority is what we call equity, diversity, inclusion, EDI. So we're trying to, we began more than a year ago, since I became the provost. We recruited a person to be our equity and diversity lead on faculty relations. We have begun last year a series of workshops and training sessions for hiring committees that are recruiting for not just research chairs but for regular tenure track positions, which include, there's a lot of robust literature on bias, conscious and unconscious bias in hiring practices, everything from the ability to read curriculum vita and understand why, for example, there may be gaps in productivity in certain people's careers, to the ways in which search committees are constructed in terms of the diversity that they represent, to the ways in which the actual interview process is created. So there's a lot of empirical evidence about practices that can be improved, not just at Concordia but elsewhere, and it's something that we're taking very seriously. So we've been working with all of the faculty deans on that for over a year. And one of the issues that we know we're struggling with, and you know, you mentioned the situation in one department or another department. We need to try to get robust data on what the composition of our faculty is, but also what the composition of our applicant pool is. So literally this week, we are sending, as we start the faculty tenure track hiring process for next year, we are working with all of the departments and asking them to provide us with the names of every individual who's applied for a position. And we are asking those individuals who are applicants for jobs at Concordia to voluntarily fill out a questionnaire which allows them to self-identify according to the categories that are identified by the Government of Canada and the Government of Quebec around minority status. And we have also added questions around gender and sexuality, which to that question as well. And the goal is twofold. The goal is to start to develop a profile of what the applicant pool is, and at the same time, by doing that, to begin, not to begin, but to provide an additional level of sensitization for our community as a whole to the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusivity issues. So we're going to start that questionnaire for new applicants to Concordia, and then over the course of the year, we want to build it out to our existing full-time faculty as a whole. Now there are some problems with the questionnaire because some people will question the categories that the Government of Canada and the Government of Quebec uses for self-identification, but we're using those categories for, I think, obvious reasons, in that we want to be able to respond to those federal and provincial norms. So it's a very good question. It's and I think it's one that I want to convey is something that we're extremely we feel extremely seriously about, and hopefully, if you're back at Concordia doing a graduate degree in the future, you'll feel that you're having a different experience from what you think you're having now.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, has Concordia, the administration, considered blind recruiting process? For those who don't know what it is, basically you remove the person's name from a CV, you just look at it straight, and if it's somebody who's clearly qualified for the job, you take them and you find out the name after?
Yeah, so so that's a mechanism which is used, can be used in certain kinds of employment. It's something that we could certainly discuss. It's a bit complicated in a academic context, because one of the things that is the part of a person's application is their curriculum vitae, which includes their research publications, grants, etc. That's public information. So you could anonymize the name of the author, but the title of the work is there, so the anonymity, it's very difficult, it's more difficult to conduct that kind of application process in an academic environment than it is in some other kinds of institutional contexts. Because so much of what people do is in the public domain.
Sophie? Yeah, my questions relate to sustainability. I noticed that it's not part of the 9 strategic direction. And I wanted to ask, because Concordia prides itself about being a sustainable campus, because like on paper we are fair trade campus and LEED certified, but in practice it's the student that run the sustainability initiative on campus, and they're all fee levy based. And when we're trying to get space or even like parking for a day, the university cannot even provide that to us for free. So not even asking the university to fund our initiative, but to, make an exception or allow us to utilize the space that should be ours during our university curriculum. So I'm just wondering, how is Concordia, what is your plan for sustainability? And especially, how can you consider, as we can see on your website, that we are really doing good on food and sustainability when our mark is our food provider, and there's a lot of problem with them, and we know that they're not sustainable in their practice.
Okay, so there's a lot in that question, and I'm the provost, so I'm responsible for the academic side. So things like the food contracts and whatnot, I'm not so up to speed on. I can tell you on the academic side of things, we have a committee on sustainability and research and curriculum, which I was chairing and which Sandra is chairing going forward. Which has very active student participation plus from some of the sustainability groups on campus. And one of the things that we're trying to do is develop more robust sustainability options for students academically. So trying to develop an online certificate in sustainability is one example. Faculty of Fine Arts has been one of the leaders in this in terms of embracing sustainability across the curriculum, or beginning the steps of embracing the curriculum across, embracing sustainability across the curriculum. There's a lot of research and academic activity which we are prioritizing at the moment, which is sustainability focused. If you look at Explore Concordia, which is the website that sort of captures the research work that our full and part-time faculty are doing, and you plug in sustainability, it's striking the number of people who are working in diverse parts of that field. I mentioned in the strategic directions process that one of the issues that we're prioritizing is cities, and a huge component of that is, of course, sustainable urbanization going forward. The solar decathlon, the deep dwelling building project is a good example of that. So I know I'm not speaking to the particular issues around access to parking or food services, because I'm not as familiar with that, but I can tell you that on the academic side, sustainability is something which which I think is highly visible, and there's a growing commitment, again, across the university as a whole in that field. If you look at some of the university research centers that exist, a number of them are, whether it's the smart zero energy buildings or the water and sustainability research centers, there's a lot happening in that space on campus. And if I think back to the hiring that that the university's made in the last few years in terms of tenure track hiring, we brought in a number of people who are real leaders in that field as well, which is, I think, helping to grow the conversation on campus.
Thank you. Chris?
I rescind.
Okay, Marlene?
Just a question about, my name is Marlene, I'm an arts and science counselor. So basically I saw that in your presentation that you showed interest in researching mainly sciences, so therefore like pure sciences or STEM sciences, and there's also more opportunities for PhD students for research. However, what I would like to know is that in this new strategy, is there space for research in social sciences for undergraduates? Because a lot of times when undergraduate students would like to jump into the world of research, they need experience. However, sometimes, personally as a social science, as a police science student, I feel like there might be missing opportunities here at Concordia for research opportunities that could be here. So I would just like to know if is there any openings in that way? Is there any plans into incorporating undergraduate students into like the discipline research?
So that's a good question. The answer is yes. So I did mention the investigative journalism program as one example, but I can give you another one. For many, many years, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada had a program called the Undergraduate Student Research Awards, which allowed senior undergraduate students in the sciences and engineering to get funding to work with faculty members on a research project over the course of the summer. So of course it was targeted entirely at science and engineering students, and it was a terrific success. What we did a few years ago, actually at the time when I was still the Vice President of Research and Graduate Studies, was we created a matching fund for undergraduate student research awards, the CUSRAs, the Concordia University Student Research Awards, which would be available to students regardless of where they were coming from. So to create possibilities for undergraduate research students in social sciences and the arts, humanities, and business school to also benefit from those experiences. We've got a very strong, very robust arts and social sciences profile at Concordia. We're recognized as leaders in that area today and over the next couple of days. Just as a for example, our Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling is hosting more than close to 800 scholars and students coming from around the world on various topics relating to oral history and social memory. And that's just an example. They're coming to Concordia because Concordia has a global reputation for strength and leadership in that area. So yes, it's true that sometimes the research profile or the research impact that happens in the sciences, engineering, and health seems more accessible and more visible, but we're a university which is, I'm coming from a humanities discipline, I'm an historian myself. We're a university which is also heavily invested in the success of our students in those areas. And sometimes it's clubs like science, United Nations clubs, things of that nature, which are relatives to the space Concordia. The needs are different, the size may be different, the number of students who are participating may be different. But I think the support structures are there. Could we do more? Yes, absolutely. I would love it to increase the number of undergraduate student research awards that we could offer. But again, we need to find that. We need to either find a donor who's passionate about that, or find some other way to fund it. And again, that ties right into the focus on experiential learning. Give students that opportunity to get a research experience as an undergraduate.
However, I would say I think it'd be important to look into, it's below minimum wage for the, I know it's kind of like a bursary, so it's a bursary, for 4 months paid, below minimum wage, and it's working full-time, and there's no breaks at all in the summer, so maybe that could be a way to augment it for people who can afford to do it because of the bursary costs and the breaks.
Yeah, I have to, and so we aligned the funding norms with what the answered funding norms were, so it really is a bursary as opposed to a job, in a classic sense, but, you know, I hear what you're saying.
Just my advice.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Alright, so this concludes the first-time speakers list. At this point, I would suggest that we let our presenter be on their way. If there are speakers that still have questions, is there anywhere that they could reach you? Or
Sure,
email address?
there's the by email at provost@concordia.ca.
Alright, perfect. So if there's nothing further, I'd like to thank you very much for coming and for staying this long.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Alright, perfect.
Okay. Thank you for, hope you don't have too long an evening ahead.
Alright, so at this point, we are on the topic of appointments. Just a reminder, there are several seats open. There were 3 councillors that resigned between last meeting and this meeting, so that was Alex Barra and Daniel Abrams. So there are some extra seats open on committees. It's council's decision if they want to appoint tonight or leave it open until the by-elections when we will get more councillors. Princess?
Oh, mine was just more about like point of personal privilege. At some point, could we like take like a 10-minute break after like we have this conversation? Just cause like, whew, that was a lot.
Okay. Just one
Can we
more
actually
answer?
take one now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just like James speak and then.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, I just kind of wanted to express support for postponing the appointments for the resignations until after the by-elections, considering they're going to be kind of very, very soon, right, usually, and there are going to be new councillors, especially since people, you know, have resigned, and so if, you know, so there are at least some spots available for new councillors that are going to be coming in, and it's not just monopolized by us, you know, there are empty spots, and I think we should probably give chances for councillors that are coming in to have space on committee instead of filling everything up and then pushing people to resign, right? So I think that's more fair for everybody.
Great, thank you. So if everyone's amenable to it, we'll take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 8:42 to 44. Anytime you leave garbage and stuff around, I get in trouble, so I will judge how all of you like me by the amount of garbage left at the end of the meeting. That being said, we are on the point of appointments, and Lexi, Loyola Committee.
Yeah, I'm back every week. I'm the ghost of Constance Council. We have 2 seats open in the Loyola Committee. It's a great committee. Paige and Jared are on it. It's lit. Working on a lot of really fun stuff. Really excited about it. So yeah, please put yourself up for nomination.
Great. Would anyone like to sit on the Loyola Committee? All right. If there's no one.
Point of order.
Yes?
Can we have the list of councillors who sit on 0 committees right now?
I have the list of councillors who sit on committees.
Can we cross-reference that with the list of councillors and say who's not on a committee? Not to pressure them, but just to maybe identify? Based on the bylaws, we should be on at least 1 committee.
Standing regs.
Standing regs.
Hillel is not on any committee. Yes.
Is there anyone in this room not on a committee?
That's easier.
Sammy's not on any committee.
I'm on 2.
Oh, sorry. Oh yes, you are. Sorry, my apologies. Sorry.
It's all good.
My apologies. Resigned. Abdullah is not on any committee, though they have missed 3 meetings, and I will contact them to see if they wish to request an excusal or if they wish to resign. And Sally does not appear to be on any committee, but they might have appointed themselves last meeting to something. So basically everyone except Hillel. All good? Okay, that means, yes?
And me.
Oh, and Rowan. Oh yes, good point. Sorry, my bad. And Rowan. Yes, James?
Yes, so I would like to put forward a motion to postpone the appointments of which one's policy, sustainability, and appointments, SAF, and I guess Loyola because nobody volunteered, till after the by-election to allow incoming councillors a chance to sit on committees without pushing anybody out. I think it's going to be fair for kind of everybody and the new councillors that are going to be coming in, and I'd like to put that up for consideration onto the floor.
All right, I think I know what people are going to say. Yes, Sophie?
I'm just speaking for staff. They've wrote us a letter. They need someone appointed. So
Well, then I
can we
guess-
just consider
for staff,
all the things
I
you
would-
said minus that?
Yeah, minus SAF. Everything minus SAF then.
Alright, do we have a second for tabling policy, sustainability, Loyola, and appointments and external? Like, do you want all the standing committees or just?
Yeah, well, all the standing committees that are, yeah, I mean, all the standing committees we need appointments for, except for SAF and elections and participation, because I believe we did a binding motion last time to appoint somebody this session, so we have to.
Okay, yeah, those aren't standing committees. Okay, so to table all the standing committees to post by elections. Do we have a second? Rory, do you want to motivate?
Well, I guess I already did, so I think it's gonna be fair for everybody, especially the councillors that are coming in and the councillors that aren't present. I guess we'll give them one last chance to, the people that aren't present, one last chance to stand for committee and give a chance to the incoming councillors after the by-election to actually participate and not have all the committees filled and kind of push people to resign from the committees they're on.
Okay, thank you. Caleb?
Just a question, if I may, to the chairs of the committees. Has the lack of people not being appointed to a committee affect the operations of the committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Roger?
I mean, I could speak for appointments, like it would be good to have like at least one of those seats open, and just because like appointments does have a lot to do, and we're currently, I think, me and Margot, and then obviously Princess is the chair, so that's like kind of a small group of people, and it does hamper our ability, so it would be nice, but like, it's whatever people want here, so, yeah.
Right, thank you. Yes, Chris?
Like I was sitting on appointments, so I do know the situation. Well, I mean, I don't really care either way. I think it should be up to appointments committee at this meeting to decide if you're gonna get more people or not. But it might also be more effective with just 3 people because it's easier to like determine when you're gonna meet up and like to sync that up. But obviously, your preference, I wouldn't speak for the committee.
Okay, thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, just to speak to appointments, it's not actually easier the less people you have all the time. Sometimes it means that you can't meet quorum for really important things. As someone who sits ex officio on appointments committee and like all of the standing committees, not having enough people also means that like quorum is less, but that means that less people are making the democratic decisions about who are sitting on what committee. So it's really important that we have enough people, especially like the chair of appointments, Princess, also co-chairs and chairs other committees, and so there's like a lot of work to be done, and it would be really helpful if we could have more council participation on appointments so that we can like get some appointments done, because you'll notice that we also don't have any student at large positions appointed yet, and in large part that's because like we do need more bodies on appointments, so.
Point of information.
Yes.
On the agenda, it says that there's only 1 seat open on appointments. Is there
Oh, there's
something-
2, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a recent resignation, sorry about that.
Okay.
Rowan?
No, none. I rescind that changes things.
Okay, so the motion on the table is to table the appointments of standing committees, table the appointment of councillors to standing committees until after the by-election. Is everyone good with that motion?
If I can then, yeah, since there's 2 missing seats from appointments, I believe that I think appointing 1 member at least would be a good idea today, just because of working. So,
Do you want to move to amend to just remove appointments?
well, no, not appointments in general. Like I guess 1 should still be postponed until after election, but.
So was that an official amendment?
Yeah. So
Okay.
so for appointments, we appoint 1 today, and then the other one after the election.
Okay, do we have a second? Caleb already motivated. Sophie?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that like leaving seats open for folks in the by-elections, that's like great, but it's also possible for people to resign seats if they decide that their specialization on certain committees isn't for them before by-elections. Like that's also an option. So if you're on a lot of committees and you decide that you're not actually interested in all of them, it is completely like within councilors' rights. So even if we do fill all the seats, it is still possible for people in by-elections to get seats by like seats opening up. I know that I actually, when I was on council, took seats from like councilors who resigned at that meeting. So it's not a big deal. Like it's fill the seats, don't fill the seats, but like the seats have to be filled. So if we can fill them now and then people can step down later, that's an option as well.
Great, thank you. So the current amendment on the table is to specify that one appointments committee seat be filled today, or be at least up for grabs today. Is there any opposition to that amendment? Okay, so if not, we're back on the main motion and there's no speakers list. So the current motion on the floor is to table all the appointments of councillors to standing committees, with the exception of one appointments committee seat. Is there any more discussion? Okay, so if not, we can move to a vote. So all those in favor, please raise your placards. 5. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry, can you raise your placards again? Everyone kind of did that in the wrong order. 6, and any abstentions?
No.
Okay, and noted, Caleb.
And Sammy.
And Sammy. Perfect. So that, Rory? Okay, so that works. So the motion fails and we're still on appointments. So at this point, we are on appointment to the Sustainability Committee. Akira?
Yes. There's still spots on the Sustainability Committee. As Sophia had said previously, not having people on the committee makes it hard to meet quorum and have meetings. And on the Sustainability Committee, we have funding proposals to approve, and it's large sums of money because it's things like the greenhouse renovation. So it's kind of important that there are more students implicated in decisions like this. And also we are in charge of approving all things sustainable with all the other executive projects. So technically their projects can't move forward unless my committee approves it. So if you're interested in sustainability or think you have time to put yourself onto another committee, it would be a really great help if you know yourself.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone who'd like to put forth their nomination to be on the Sustainability Committee? Currently, you would be working with Jad, Paige, Sophie, and Akira. All right. Yes, Caleb.
When does the committee meet?
We do not have a set date, but we literally just put an agenda and then see what we can.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So.
I'd like to put forth my nomination.
Okay. Do we have a second? Chad. Right. Is there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves? If not, Caleb, why would you like to sit on the Sustainability Committee?
Well, I'm studying economics, but I'm developing an interest in sustainable development, and it's something I'd like to start small, and I think Sustainability Committee could be a first step towards that.
Thank you. Is there any more discussion before we move to a vote? All right, yes, James?
I motion to appoint Caleb to sustainability.
All right, do we have a second? Sophie, all those in favor of appointing Caleb, please raise their placards. 13, all those opposed? Perfect.
I abstain.
Caleb abstains. 1 abstention, so that carries almost unanimously. And with that, we can move to Appointments Committee. So on this committee, you would be working with Margot, Patrick, and Princess. Is there anyone who'd like to appoint themselves to and Marlene, I think?
Wait, what? Sorry.
Appointments Committee? No.
The what?
Appointments Committee?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, you're not an appointment, sorry. Okay, so then just Margot and Patrick. And Princess. Yes, James?
I would like to nominate myself.
Okay, do we have a second? Peter? Is...
No.
Sorry?
I'm not second.
Oh, not second. Okay, do we have a second?
Sammy.
Sammy, there we go. Okay, would anyone else like to appoint and nominate themselves? Peter? Do we have a second? Rowan? Okay, so we have James and Peter. And yes, Rowan?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Okay, do we have a second? Rory? Okay, would would anyone else like to nominate themselves to the appointments committee? Okay, so if not, we'll do motivations and yes. Peter.
I resign, so it's only two.
Okay. So in that case, no Peter. James, why would you like to sit on appointments?
I mean, I believe that I want to kind of be involved. I think it's a committee that kind of stuff needs to get done. I know that there's a lot of positions that are not filled. Like I know that there's only one JV seat right now, and I think the committee really needs to move forward. I think that it's important. There's no engineering representation on appointments, so I think that's going to be a good thing to have kind of an opinion from as many faculty as possible on there, and that's pretty good reason. There's a lot of stuff that needs to get filled, and I think engineering faculty needs some sort of say in it. So.
Thank you. Rowan, why would you like to sit on appointments?
I've sat on appointments before in 2016-17 year as well as 17-18 last year. I've got a good chunk of experience on the committee. Not on any other committees, so yeah.
Alright, thank you. Yes, Jared?
I'd also like to motivate for Rowan, just again, he isn't on any committees right now, and he's obviously had experience on this committee, so I think it would be a wise choice to elect him.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I just want to flag as an issue that this has been a committee where there's been some questions in the past. Again, we have all actually representing candidates. If there's anyone who identifies with any sort of diversity or equity-seeking group and would like to be on this committee, I would really like to encourage you to step forward. I can't force anybody, obviously, but I just want to flag this as something that's happening again.
Great, thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had? Okay, so if not, there's 2 nominations on the table that require a motion. Yes, Michaela?
Oh, I would just like to motivate for Rowan, as many times they tried to sit on many committees, and I think everybody should have the opportunity to sit on a committee, so I think Rowan did a great job with experience.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this point there's 2 nominations. Yes, Roy?
Because there's two nominations of councillors and there's only 1 seat available. There's 2 seats.
Yep.
And there's 2 nominations. So
no,
Peter. Because I resign. So only two.
yeah, sorry, Roy speaker.
So then, can I move to approve both candidates in omnibus?
Yes. Do you have a second? Patrick, you want to motivate?
Well, if it was a contested seat, then I would have asked to do a closed ballot because I just think councillors shouldn't be voting for each other, etc. But if there's 2 seats and 2 people, then it sounds like a great match.
All right, thank you. Okay, is there any more discussion we had before we move to vote? All right, so all those in favor of appointing James and who was that? James and Rowan to the appointments committee, please raise your placards. 13, all those opposed? All right, so that carries. And Rowan and Sophie abstain.
This has been a great day for gender parity.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we can move on to the policy committee where there is 1 seat. And Michaela, this one's yours. Did I do that wrong?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, so policy committee, we actually have a meeting this Friday. We're going to be going over the bursary policy and looking at recommendations to improve the judicial board structure, especially during election time. Also, getting updates about the governance review and reviewing what the lawyers have done for the council. We're just getting started really. There's a lot to do. I think just making sure I'm filling out the mentions. So,
thank you. Yes, Patrick?
I'd like to nominate Caleb.
Okay. Do we have your consent?
Yeah, consent.
Okay. There's 1 nomination. Okay, if there's, yes, Rowan?
What's the, who's currently on the committee?
Currently, oh sorry, I forgot to read that out. Currently on the committee is James, Patrick, Samantha, and chaired by Michaela. Yes? Okay, is there, yes, Margot?
I'd like to nominate myself for the committee.
Okay, do we have a second? Rory? there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves for policy committee? Okay, so if not, Caleb, why would you like to sit on policy?
Well, first of all, poli sci student in addition to being an economics student, first of all. Second of all, as some of you may know, at my provincial politics level, I've helped make resolutions and policy get past the conventions. And yeah, I think that will be an asset. Pretty much that.
Okay, thank you. Margot?
So I ran before for policy as well and was not elected. I have just finished working with a bunch of folks writing a about 20-page long anti-sexual violence policy for the Arts and Science Faculty Association, and I am done that project, so I am very excited to put more of my hours into starting a policy. I am very good at it, and I like doing it. I do it for fun, and would honestly be working on these policies either way, but I would really like to actually have a vote. Yeah, I think I would be really, really good at it, and I will show up to meetings.
All right, thank you. Okay, so at this point, the floor is open for motivations. Yes, James?
Yes, so I would like to motivate on behalf of Caleb. I've worked with him, especially I think I remember last year, I was at the youth convention of the, at a youth convention for policy for the provincial politics, and I think he did really well, kind of motivating for policy and trying to bring things through. So I kind of vouch for his ability to do that. He's very good with kind of this type of related things. He did a really good job when he was on the gynae executive, so I think he's a really good fit for this type of situation.
Thank you. Okay, so if there's nothing further, there's two prospective appointees for one seat, so we will go to secret ballot, and I just need to steal some paper. Yes, James?
Oh yeah, secret ballot. Oh.
It's automatic.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Does anyone have paper?
I do.
Yeah, steal some.
How many sheets? One or two?
Thank you. All right, you all know the drill. Tiny sheets of paper, fill them out. It's either you can vote or abstain. Yeah, so your choices are Margot and Caleb.
Hey, like, come on, we're just about to make history.
Which is why they don't.
Well, it's the Mulan. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to.
Chris, what's your deal with the mulattoes?
Mulatto?
Yeah, what's the deal with that? Like,
I don't know.
jeez.
Because he just had a new latte and
What's up?
Alright everyone, just a reminder that we're still in session, so if we could keep quiet, that would be excellent. And I will come around and pick up the ballots. Everyone good here? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just look. Oh, sorry. Oh, you missed it. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. I'll literally just put it somewhere.
Sit down.
I'm cool.
Oh, this is. Thank you.
You're getting us stressed.
You don't have to be on my side.
Anybody want to go?
Oh. Yeah, that was good, wasn't it?
Oh my god.
Alright, thank you very much. Thank you everyone very much for your patience. So after a secret ballot, Margot, you have been appointed to the Policy Committee. Congratulations. If we could avoid the clapping, that would also be excellent. All right, so that being said, we can move on to External and Mobilization Committee. Last minute resignation leaves us with one seat. Unfortunately, Kemi had to leave, so they're not here to talk about the committee. If anyone else wants to talk about it or wait till next council, that is also acceptable. Yes? Okay.
So we don't need a whole lot, so the time commitment isn't huge, but mostly we discuss funding for external projects, and we also approved the yearly external project, the anti-sexual violence campaign. If you're interested in getting more involved with that, it's the place to go.
There's a point of information. How many times do you guys meet? Do you guys meet often, or what? Like?
We don't meet a whole bunch. We mostly meet on like by means basis, but so it's not a huge time commitment. But
how many times have you met already?
I think
so, like,
3 times, 4 times.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Chad?
This is the same committee that we got emails about, right?
No. This is the External and Mobilization Committee. The one that was in the email was SAF, so that's later on. So on this committee currently are James, Margot, Marlene, and it is chaired by Kemi. So if anyone would like to put forth their nomination, yes, Peter?
Moving my, yeah.
Okay, do we have a second? Margot? Is there anyone else who'd like to put forth their nomination? Yes, James?
Nominate Caleb.
Okay, do you consent?
First, I'm gonna not accept.
All right. So that means there is one prospective nominee. If there's nothing else, Peter, why would you like to sit on the External and Mobilization Committee?
I mean, I've been working a bit with the external before, like in the past. So like I kind of know like what is going on, and like for me like I'm basically nowadays like you could be able to get involved with those stuff. So like it's be easier for me to work with stuff, things going on like those kind of things. So yeah, I would, and also this might be my last semester being on counter, so if possible, like.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any discussion? Yes, Sophie?
I move to appoint Peter.
Okay, do we have a second? Margot? Okay, is there any dissension to appointing Peter to the External Mobilization Committee? All right, perfect. So that carries unanimously. And with that, we are on 6, that should be F, SAF. And Akira, this one's yours.
Yes, we still need a member for staff. Should I read the statement? No.
Does anyone want Akira to read the statement that was sent out by Mark from staff?
Well, basically, it's just that like there is a seat for a council member that's supposed to be in staff, and we technically need them in order to approve funding and for it to run properly and smoothly. And because the year has started already, we need to kind of get the ball rolling in terms of like going through further applications. So the seat has been empty for a while, and we've been withholding funding because of that. So if there's somebody that's willing to participate, we meet usually 1 to 2 times a month for a 3-hour period. Yeah, please nominate yourselves.
Right, Chad?
What is the? I didn't really understand what the committee
do you want to just explain what the committee is about a little bit?
Yeah, so staff works under Sustainable Concordia, and the committee, well, the funding committee funds sustainable projects that run on and off campus that affect students of Concordia. So, yeah.
All right.
A point of information.
Yep.
Just SAF is not part of Sustainable Concordia. They're separate. It's not, information. It's not important.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to appoint themselves to sit on the Sustainability Action Fund? Yes, Marlene?
I'd like to nominate myself.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I said appoint, nominate, seconded by Patrick. Is there anyone else who'd like to nominate themselves to staff? Okay, not Marlene, why would you like to sit on staff?
Well, I do have an interest in sustainability. However, I wasn't able to show it through like actions in through like at the Concordia University. So I believe that like by being invested in that committee, I believe that I can help and I can bring on my interest in the sense of sustainability in Concordia. So.
Okay, thank you. Caleb?
Is there anybody on the speakers list?
No.
Okay. I move to appoint Marlene to the Sustainability Action Fund Committee.
Okay, seconded by Rory. So if there, yes, Rory?
No,
Discussion?
just leaving my hand up for the vote.
Okay, so if there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please raise your placards. 11, 12, all those opposed. Perfect, so that carries. Yes, Rory?
I also want to make just maybe open a discussion point about what can we as council do to address some of the other concerns in, it was Mark, right? Mark's letter?
Mm-hmm.
What we can do to address some of those other concerns. I know that they've mentioned, like, for the past couple of years, we have not appointed enough people to staff, and this has been an ongoing problem. It seems we now have a complaint that this is an ongoing problem. Perhaps we should look at, like, putting some timelines in place, I don't know, be it procedurally with our chair, to just say, you know, this is something that we need to emphasize every year in June, in May, you know, whatever it is, or even to put some sort of policy change in place to say, this appointment must be done at X point in time, and if we can't fill it, like, council has to find someone. So maybe we can just have a brief discussion about that, because we got this letter, and I don't know, is it elsewhere on the agenda?
No.
No, so I mean, we're remiss if we just ignore the fact that we got a written letter from Mark. It would be disrespectful not to respond, or at least discuss it.
Thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea actually, because just what happened is someone voted to table it, there was no discussion, and we just didn't talk about it. So I think maybe setting a date to appoint it is a good idea.
Thank you. Rowan?
Was this letter sent out to all of council?
Okay.
It was in the updated documents, I think.
It was in the first set.
It was in the first
set. Yeah.
Okay, well, I read it.
It was also in the updated because I accidentally resent you all of the first set.
So maybe if councillors haven't read it, could we have it read? Akira, maybe?
Sure,
Yeah.
Akira.
To the General Council of the Concordia Student Union, it is with regret and frustration that I write this message because for the third year in a row, the staff is faced with the same situation. The CSU Council has shown their unwillingness to meaningfully engage with the Sustainability Action Fund by delaying this appointment of one of its members to our board of directors. This delay is detriment to the effective management of our organization, as we will have to either delay our board training or go forward without the CSU Council's appointee. This requires additional work for us and inconsistencies for the members. I want to take this opportunity to make it abundantly clear that I have it on official CSU record that in subsequent years, the staff will not wait for the CSU Council to appoint a member according to schedule the Council sees fit. If there is no CSU Council person appointed before the staff's scheduled annual general meeting each year, we reserve the right, as per our consultation, Article 2, Section 1, to allow any undergraduate student enrolled at the university to nominate themselves for the Council seat.
Thank you. Sophie and then Rory.
I was.
Rory?
I move that if council cannot appoint a staff member by the June regular council meeting, that they immediately refer it to appointments committee for appointment of a general student.
Okay, so the motion was that if it's not done by, sorry, what was the date?
June regular council meeting.
If you referred to appointments. Do we have a second? Rowan. Do you want to motivate Rory?
Well, it seems like this is an issue. We've all read, or at least have had read, this complaint letter. I don't know whether June is the right deadline to put. I don't think any information about that was put in this letter, so I'm open to any amendments if anyone knows that there'd be a better timeline for them. Maybe we come back later and change this after getting some consultation from staff. But I think setting a deadline and saying if we can't meet it, then we will send it to our own appointments committee is at least a good first step. And then that way we can also have, maybe Sophie or Akira go back to staff and say, okay, we're trying to do something, here's what we've done, what else can we do?
Okay, thank you. Rowan?
I think June is a good date, especially because it then allows for us to have time to appoint someone ourselves. If no councillors are willing, gives to councils for councillors to appoint themselves. And furthermore, our staff usually has their GN in September. So if we put it to the September council meeting, then that gives us, 5 days before the staff, GA, etc.
Alright, so is that an official motion to amend?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Do we have a second?
To June?
Did you want to amend June to September? Was that
No.
your? Oh, you didn't. Oh,
We
sorry.
said June was good.
Oh, June.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. My apologies. Just ignore that. James?
Yeah, no, so I think it's a really good idea to have this thing in place, so if staff really needs this membership, then I think basically punting it over to appointments committee if we can't do it ourselves is a real good idea. And I think for even further than that, I think it's a good idea to put that line into the actual standing regulations so that councils after us actually have to abide by that.